I'm going to start by asking you about these water tanks. The minute we come into the gallery and observe them, we're immediately put in mind of some form of crisis.
The tanks I chose, like in the very beginning, of course, because I found them interesting because of their appearance. How an installation like this comes to be is more or less not a thought of like, okay, I'm doing a work about crisis, of course, but more a feeling that I have when I look at something and like my intuition says that's an object of relevance. I found one of those in the ruin that you see upstairs in one of the movies in Russia. So that's the first time I saw one of those and thought, okay, you can build something out of those.
This is an installation that really guides the viewer's movement through your work. It's very directional and in a certain way processional. But here again, I'm going to say that one might experience a sense of anxiety in this environment. And, you know, I was thinking of the rat in a maze scenario. And typically, you're in an art gallery, let's say you're looking at paintings, and there might be other people in the room with you, but it doesn't make any difference, right? But here, as you're walking through this labyrinth, when you run into another person, it's actually a startling event. It also makes you aware that you are integrated into the work, like that you also are someone who's being looked at because you're looking at these other people and they're looking at you, and at the same time you're looking at the artworks, right? So there is a space of a kind of paranoia, perhaps.
That's, I think, one of the moods that could exist in here. Another could be that you're hidden from others, that you could like stand there and look at a painting without somebody noticing you. We are conditioned to think about art as something that we perceive in a certain way and that presents itself to us in a certain way. And I wanted to break with that. It is in a form, yes, like controlling the way of the viewer or the way we have to, like we can stand in front of one of the artworks. And maybe there's the link to crisis. It also is a what if, like what if this is how it looks like. What I try to do is take a hierarchy away. There are oil paintings and there are paintings that are made in airbrush and a technique that like how cars are made. And both the oil paintings and the others are kind of done in a way that suggests like mastership or some kind of certain kind of mastership. There is something happening with that pristine surface that I like.
A look that is partly industrial or that brings some element of industry into this overly crafted object, right?
Yeah.
So you wind up with a kind of hybrid.
There is a big question mark when it comes to the hand of the author and then of the author and the importance of the author itself.
You know, the graffiti, of course, can be read as defacement. That's how it functions oftentimes in the real world. It can be read as claiming this environment that, again, has not been made for you. But because you intentionally execute it on your own work, it also becomes just a gesture, another mark within your repertoire of marks, right?
The mark making on the paintings are hurting a perfect surface that is there, that is mirrored. The question about graffiti is that I think it shows this, what I said, this like kind of system that has an uncontrolled part. It shows also that it is controlled, and this is why this expression is happening, right? It is controlled who owns what, where is the money going to, like where can you be, where can you not be. For me, on the clowns there's my initials, like all over the surface. They're destroying the surface, they are extremely controlled. There's no like, it's not me, it's a friend putting it down. It is like kind of the consequence for me working like I do is that I don't put my name on something because I question the idea of the artist / God. I looked at the figures on the oil paintings. All these scenes were taken out of a piece of mine called Nature Morte. The piece is long, and there were a lot of images taken, a lot of images that I could have sourced from the internet, a lot of images like that a photographer did, and there are only certain images that I chose to be painted like this. For me, it's important to think about life and also about this process of choice and like what you choose for it to live on.
Obviously, when I was growing up, this was after the atomic explosions, and so my generation would have been among the earlier ones that sort of live under that cloud, but nevertheless, it was still quite an abstract notion that the world could be destroyed in a second. So that, you know, the thing that you were saying about being here and not being here is interesting from that perspective, because yes, we did think about that and talk about it, but still it seemed abstract. And I'm thinking about that in relationship to how you filter this condition of anguish or angst, oftentimes through young people, the place of youth in your work. It strikes me as demonstrating maybe a kind of empathy for people to whom this now is so present and not abstract at all.
The film upstairs is called Youth. It is also a reflection of that moment, I think, where there is a strong uncertainty and a certain kind of randomness to action or to decision making, or maybe it seems like it. And I often think there lies something in it that is, for example, making art. There is a certain unlinearity that I see reflected in the movement of the horses upstairs, and like destruction that is like represented in the images of the nuclear detonations in the clouds. That is seemingly beautiful. But then there is something that is extremely powerful in there, and it can be used like destructive, and it can be used creative.
Slow motion, maybe some dissolves. Or the way that one scene follows the next is very impressionistic.
Also, it's kind of the nature of those horses that they move in this way, and when they are heard, it's so powerful that somehow I started to project human feelings into them. I think that's something that maybe connects with a younger generation, that they see things inside the work that is like yet open, that doesn't say like, oh, this is gonna be about this. This is an exhibition that talks about control and the society of us right now in this very moment, but it's like something that is like uneasy feeling and that is like open still. And I think what can make the connection to a generation of people that also needs to look very carefully to see things and to be around, that also takes that freedom in like not being straightforward all the time, but like taking turns and detours.
So I saw your installation at the German Pavilion in Venice, and I remember feeling somewhat sorry in a certain way for the protagonists of this piece, not for the because they had to do what they were doing in that space, but just thinking about their condition, again, as young people, and the world that they inhabit, and the way that they have to sort of confront that world under constant surveillance. These figures, to me, were existing in a kind of hellscape of youth, all the conditions that you're playing up in Faust, for instance, which to me are not just about the idea of existing in a controlled, pseudo-transparent environment, also the conditions of having to sort of live through your appearance to the world, and in a way being completely physically subsumed into an economy.
Faust was especially reflecting in a form, a system that I think we are in, or I was in. The group that I worked with in Faust, we met all in Frankfurt, and as students, and like we were friends, and some of them came from Foresight Company, so they were just like starting to dissolve. So Bill Foresight like gave up his company, and some of the dancers like joined in with me because I was starting to do these pieces and wanted to work with them. And we shared a certain amount of experience together. We really like spent almost every day together. It was really like somehow a group of friends that grew there. And Frankfurt is very much like a transit city. It's quite rough. There's a lot of crime, there's a lot of prostitution, there's a lot of drug trafficking, because there's also the European Central Bank, and there's a lot of bank buildings and glass, and I think all of this ended up us being in the situation where we created this piece, and my idea was to move the verticality of those glass, transparent but yet separating glass facades into some horizontal. I think that is hell, the world we're living in, and building classes and the separation that is like seemingly transparent but is so not, and the control system that we're living in is just reflected in that piece. You're right. The movements and positions and compositions in Faust are to an extent speaking about a certain empowerment that you have when you know how to speak back, how to look back. Maybe not in words, but maybe in screams, or, you know, there is something in that piece that talks about empowerment.
I imagine them as a product of a system which begins perhaps with a choreography sketch. Then the choreography is performed. Then something from that choreography is sort of brought into the next series of drawings.
Yeah.
And so there's a constant alternation between drawing, making this still image, and then this other image that is enacted, right?
Yeah.
That is actually a situation of some sort.
You're right. And also, I would draw from them because I also draw from real life when it comes to compositions in the performance pieces. So I see something, I might sketch it up, or I might like just remember it, and then it ends up in one scene in one of the performance pieces.
In a certain formal way, I see perhaps some kind of reverberation with the way that we're being made to move through this environment, constantly turning a corner, another corner, straight line, another corner. And then upstairs, I think this is entirely deliberate, but when you watch the video that's shot in that demolished housing block, Gorky Park, I guess, of Eliza Douglas walking through that space, that there's a distinct echo of how the viewer would have walked through the space on the ground floor, then they somehow see it reflected in this film on the upper floor. But by that point, we've traveled out of Los Angeles and into Russia.
For sure, there is like a pathway carved in the snow, and the pathway determines the way she walks, and sometimes it's her POV, sometimes she's filmed from the back, and the movements are quite robotic or automated. The whole thing is like a perfect loop. If you would put the last frame towards the first frame, there's no escape, you know, like it goes on and on and on. But there is something in the idea of the loop and how things can be trapped, and like, because the loop never exists out of context, and even if the loop is the same as also the loop is down here, the music's also a loop, right? First is the clown with autotune, then it's Atto's speech about like losing his mind, then it's the guitar, then it's the sweet lullaby song, and then again the guitar, again. It's like constant, and I have the feeling still there's never a repetition of a loop because everything around it changes all the time.
With the second part of that proposition, you're also offering a way out.